Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Please don't make me start calling you by names. Go ahead and take a seat. Jason, Martin. So hopefully you've gotten something to eat by now. If you haven't, you're too late. Grab a plate on your way out. My name is Christopher Donald, and I am the CEO of the District of Columbia Housing Finance Agency. And I want to thank you all for being here in attendance. I walked into the room this morning, and I was like, look at God. We thought that there were going to be just a few people here bantering back and forth, exchanging ideas, but we are grateful that you have all decided to join us on this wondrous day, the first day of Black History Month in 2023. So before I get started, I do want to take an opportunity to recognize some of the extraordinary people that helped us to pull this off. The folks over at HAND, Heather Raspberry and her team, Courtney Battle, who I don't see. Courtney, are you here? Okay, she's in the lobby. And Tiana Overton, also from the HAND team. Thank you guys. They took my call at, I guess, 10 minutes to 12, and the party started at 12, and they were like, sure, we'll help you, Chris, thanks. So they were crucial in kind of generating awareness and in the registration of the panel today. I'd also like to thank my team, starting with my public relations / comms team. They seem to continue to follow me and my crazy ideas that I halfway speak out loud. And this was a big one. This was one that we did in kind of record time. So Yolanda and Susan, where are you guys? And Yolanda's my chief corraller, so she has a very difficult job. So thank you to them. So I also want to recognize my board. Heather Wellington is here. Where are you, Heather? There we go. I'm not sure if anybody else from the board is here. I can't see, they got the bright lights in my face. But Heather has been a crucial member of the board. She is consistently asking me to be better, to be more organized, to be more timely. And so I appreciate that level of discipline that she's trying to instill in myself and in the rest of the organization. Really appreciate you being here today to be supportive. And so now I really want to take an opportunity to introduce what we're talking about here today. Today is really about bringing together a group of people to talk about the extraordinary opportunity of being an American. But not simply any kind of American, it is an exceptional American. In the words of Alex de Tocqueville, when he talked about democracy in America, we are lucky and we are special in this country. And so I want for us to explore that idea. We here at the agency dream of a moment where equity can flow from the street corner to the corner office, because we know that there were no first-class seats on the Amistad. And General Sherman's Special Field Order number 15 remains a dream deferred. And in a city where the net worth of white households exceeds that of black households by 81 times, we know that there's certainly more work for us to do. So what's our purpose here today? Today is my ode to the melanin rainbow and all the flavors from butterscotch to mahogany. Today is a moment we celebrate American exceptionalism, not as defined by hue, but as defined by the very ethos and founding of our great country. I am sure that W.E.B. Du Bois had that very thing in mind when he first waxed poetically about the talented 10th, that rarefied air that many ways and many people in this very room occupy. Du Bois popularized and immortalized this concept while not its originator. He brought it into the popular consciousness and jargon of the early 20th century sociologists. So why Baldwin and Du Bois? We started this discussion series because Baldwin and Du Bois represent two clear examples of American exceptionalism. Baldwin was a social critic and a keen observer of American hypocrisy during the Civil Rights Movement. And these observations transcended racial lines. Baldwin didn't just talk about other folk, he talked about our folk too. Baldwin insisted that all Americans live up to its stated axiom that all men are created equal. Du Bois was and remains one of the most renowned intellectuals in the history of America. He was prolific in his analysis. And if you haven't read The Souls of Black Folk, I would encourage you to do so right away. And so it is in the shadow of these two giants that we are gathered here today in the inaugural Baldwin DuBois Discussion Series, Equity, Access, and Social Transformation. Before I introduce my panel, I think it might be useful to introduce you all. So how many developers do we have in the room? Raise your hand. How many lawyers do we have in the room? Don't raise your hands. How many bankers do we have in the room? Right. How many people do we have working for the people and in the public sector? So now you all know one another, right? The purpose of convening you here today was to bring you here today for access to one another. So take time after we finish the conversation to talk to one another. Now, I cannot tell you how giddy I am to be sitting next to the three people here on this stage, right? We oftentimes talk about gatekeepers, but these aren't the people who watch the gates. These are the people who rattle the building, right? And we have some extraordinary people that are sitting before you. Sonja Wells, who is the Chief Lending Officer from City First Broadway, a publicly traded Black-owned bank.
My God.
In our business, we oftentimes talk about credit, right? That's your ability to qualify for debt. But let me tell you, the business that we're in, that doesn't matter. That's only your first step. You've got a lending officer who decides whether or not your transaction is feasible. This woman makes that decision. Oftentimes when I hear Rick Ross say, Ross, the boss, I think of Sonja.
Okay.
So Ellis Carr. Ellis Carr is the most slept-on man in social finance. When I met Ellis, I think he was whistling a song from Sean Carter's first book of urban storytelling, In the Heart of the City, the second stanza, the 10th line, Sean waxes, I'm not looking at you dudes, I'm looking past you. Ellis is out here doing strategic mergers and acquisitions of CDFI platforms. Look that up. What you have to understand is the level of thought, right? The level of vision to do what this man is doing is absolutely incredible. But you never know who he is. When Ellis walks into a room, you would know who he is, right? But this is a man who's built a platform that has put some of the people in this audience on, and a decade from now, when you look around at the people who are successful, it will be through his doors they went. Important for you to know him. And finally, my man, 50 grand, Mr. Bo Menkiti. I've known Bo since he started flipping houses in Brooklyn, and he painted all the doors red. And I asked him one day, I was like, Bo, do you have any other colors besides red? And he chuckled, right? He said, yes, green, and that's in my bank account. But Bo Menkiti, so you all know that I appreciate and I get excited about intellect, right? But the elasticity, right, of this man's brain is absolutely amazing. And every time I sit and I talk with him, I say to myself, I'm not doing enough. I need to read more. I need to do more, because Bo is out there and I'm chasing his legacy, which he is creating in real time. When I worked for Bo, 10 years ago, right? Bo had, 1,000 agents, in the district and a couple of close-in areas. How many agents do you have under your voice now, Mr. Menkiti? I'm sorry, he's muttering over there. The man said 25,000. That's just on his brokerage platform. I don't really think you all appreciate what I just said. On the stage, you have a black man who controls a brokerage which oversees 25,000 agents. That's a big deal, right? Thank you for taking your time to be here. And so, with no further ado, I want to start a conversation that's going to be a little bit like around the card table, right? And I don't want this to be really structured, but I do. So part of the rationale for convening everybody was there's some of you all who are just starting. So everybody who's under 30, raise your hand. Wow, more of you than I thought. Okay. Everybody under 40. Okay. So you all are the next generation, right, of folks who are going to be growing into this space. I wanted you to hear from people about their journeys. Like I said about Bo, we were prepping for the panel, and he said, wait a minute. There are also people who have succeeded, but they've hit a ceiling, right? And how do you get from having that business that is a $5 million business to a $20 million business, right? So we're going to have a two-part conversation. And so I'm going to turn it over to you guys. The first question that I would ask is, when folks who are in their 20s, in their 30s come to you, what do they need to be thinking about? How do they start out on the path to be really successful? Don't do this. Come on, y'all.
Start first. Oh, thank you. A lot, guys. Ladies first, right? Okay. Thank you. You know, there's a number of things, but I think the most important thing is to be really crystal clear about where you're trying to go and what it is that you want to accomplish. So really, what does that long-term picture look like for you so that you can share it with your banker or with whomever is in the room that's going to support you in getting to that goal. And so you really have to be crystal clear about what that looks like for you, you know, based on what you know today. And so many people come to us and they say, you know, this is what I want to do. And it's like, okay, so you might think that's cutting edge, but it's really been done before. So let's talk it through and think it through so that you have a clear understanding of really where you're trying to go and what that looks like. And there's plenty of folks that are out here, like myself, like Ellis, like Bo, that can really help you form that vision in a manner that is realistic. But also, it can, you know, you can talk about cutting edge, but cutting edge, it's difficult to get there these days because there are so many things that people have thought about that have come up, you know, it's like it's been done. And so don't think that you're the first one to think of it, because probably not. You may be one of the few that maybe has thought it through enough to say, well, let me take this vision to somebody. But I think most importantly is to really be clear about where you want to go, what you want to do, what that looks like, and really who do you need to have in your network to bounce that off? Who is your support network? You can't grow without that. You need a support network.
So Sonja, let me jump in here. I'm going to talk to you all today because I've been out in the streets as a budding developer, a recovering developer, twice tried, right? And I know oftentimes, not you, me, I thought I was smarter than everybody else, right? And so I had done, you know, these multi-hundred unit deals for other people, and I thought I could tie up one of these and come to someone like you and you would just give me the money. Is that true? But why not? Why can't I, you know, I've done 1,000 units of development for XYZ Corporation. I know what I'm doing. Why can't you give me the money to do my own project?
Because it's very rare that even if you've worked for someone, you haven't seen all of the pieces of the pie. You've seen portions of it, but you've not seen the whole thing. And you need to know every step and be clear about where you might trip.
So does that mean that I have to talk to people like that dude on the end to be my partner? Does that get me there? Do you give me money when I walk in with him?
Absolutely.
She didn't mention that he used to be on her board. But Bo, like, so I've got $1 and a dream. I can see the deal. I've got the deal tied up, right? But I don't have the capital. When I come to you, when I step into your office, what do I need to be thinking about to actually craft something that can be successful?
Yeah, as you guys are talking, kind of two things came into my mind. One is this idea that I think as entrepreneurs generally, but especially as people who have the passion and the vision to go out and start something in the real estate space. And so I want to start off by saying I love that. Like that's something special. And so I love people that have that in them. But the problem with that is that like ideas are cheap and execution rules. And I've had so many people come to me, I got this idea. Nobody cares about your idea, honestly. They only care about whether you can execute your idea. And there's too many people who have a prayer and a dream for executing their idea, come to us with possibly a great idea and no ability to actually execute it. And someone, if you're thinking about the risk that a lending institution is going to take on, they actually don't care about the upside. All of us who are business people, entrepreneurs, we're looking for upside. Like, what can I create? How can I go make something happen, right? A financial institution's looking at what's the risk and what's the collateral. So their only question is, how could you screw up? And if you screw up, what can I take from you? Because that's the collateral question. And so if you say, I have a great idea, this is really awesome, I can do this, nobody cares. Nobody cares. They want to know, if you screw up, what's going to backstop you? What's going to make sure that if something goes wrong, because they're seeing deals across the whole city, they know over hundreds of deals that stuff can go wrong, crazy stuff can happen, and we're not thinking about entrepreneurial. So that was the first thing. It's like this idea that so many people come, we get excited about our idea, but we don't get as excited about the execution and how we make that happen. The other piece that I think is really interesting that comes up a lot, especially in entrepreneurs of color, is that we buy into this idea that I think the world thrusts upon us of sort of this, phoenix rising from the ashes. You grew up in this tough situation, you made it out all by yourself, you're so awesome. It's this individualistic story that gets thrust upon most of us. And honestly, that's a load of crap, right? You might have had no dad, but you had an auntie. You might have had no family, but there was a teacher at school that invested in you. People don't get to where they are without people investing in them. And there's nobody on this stage, there's nobody anywhere that you can look around that succeeded alone. They succeeded because of the amazing people that surround them, right? I'm sitting here, there's people like Melissa and Martin and all these. I can name hundreds of people whose talent and skills has paired with my little contributions to make something greater. And so I think too many people, when we're starting, buy into this idea that we're going to do it all alone. And there's a mythology around it. You doesn't look much further than either the popular culture or like our social media, that I'm an entrepreneur, I did it all alone. And the reality is, that might work if you want to sell some trinkets from your home or you want to, do some low-level stuff. But there's nobody doing anything of any big scale in the world that's doing it by themselves and that didn't figure out how to partner with other people that have complementary skills or a complementary platform.
So Ellis, you created this really fascinating and amazing platform. You kind of bridge these two because you're helping people who may be transitioning into the space, right, or who need some formal training. People are walking through your door. What are you looking for? Like, what are the signs of somebody who has the potential to be successful? And what are some of your lessons learned as you've done how many cohorts now in DC?
3 cohorts. We've graduated over 200 diverse real estate developers across the country.
Right. So Ellis is in DC, Detroit. I heard you're moving down to Texas. Is that right? That's
Dallas, the Bay Area. Yep.
Okay. So Dallas is an area, and anywhere else?
CBD.
Okay.
Maybe
I'm sorry.
the ATL.
Okay. All right.
Next.
But talk about it, man. Talk about what you're seeing.
Yeah. I mean, I first of all, it's great to be in front of you all. Chris, thanks for the invitation. And since we're around the card table, I'm about to run to Boston.
Oh, okay. All right.
Uh,
Do your thing, man.
No, I'm just joking. I can't do that with Bo and Sandra on this panel. But seriously, we launched a program called the Equitable Development Initiative in 2017 in Detroit. We had been doing work in Detroit for about 8 years at that time. We invested about $300 million in probably a half a mile radius, really helping to provide and drive both density and economic opportunity. It was after the Detroit fiscal bankruptcy, and there was a resurgence in the city. And for those of you who may not know Detroit well, Detroit is about 90% people of color. And of that 90%, about 90% are black folk. And so what we were hearing on the streets was really about the fact that there wasn't opportunities for developers to actually take the opportunity to really participate in the upside, the resurgence of Detroit, places that they had lived for generations. And so when we looked back at our own lending over that time period, we realized that it was probably about 10% of the folks that we lent to were actually diverse developers. And we began to ask ourselves why. And the answer was exactly what Bo mentioned, exactly what Sonja mentioned around a lot of dream, a lot of passion, very little experience, and quite frankly, networks did not allow them to really pursue and develop, actually get into development at a serious scale and take part of the opportunity. So we launched this program called the Equitable Development Initiative, really, which is a cohort-based program focused on providing training, helping people understand what the development process is, how to get from the dream to execution, understand all the capital sources that were available to them, because a lot of people didn't know that. And as you all probably know, it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. And having a connection to people within your network that are not just developers, but folks in the development community who can help you. So that's what we actually did. So to your point, Chris, to your question, it's really around making sure that there is more than a dream, that there's actually past execution, whether that's in a big firm or otherwise, and then having the supports around you, a team around you, that we can effectively see execution and actually being able to succeed in the development process.
So part of what I think I'm hearing you all say is that if you are a nascent developer, one of the ways to kind of push ahead is by picking some folks strategically who have done what you're doing or who have supported people like you in the past. Is that right?
That's right. So we actually, part of the program is to pair people up with mentors, folks who look like them, who have actually been down the road before. And what we saw out of that, really out of the first few cohorts in Detroit, is you start to see joint ventures between the mentors and the mentees, so that people could actually get on, actually do work and be successful at it. And then after the second cohort, the city came to us and said, how can we make the developers who are coming out of this program, how can we give them preference in RFPs for developments around the city? So we began to use our relationships both with the private sector and the public sector to actually shine the light rightly on the people who are from the community doing excellent work in the community.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really cool thought. You know, Mayor Bowser has done something similar with her equity initiative here in the city, and I think that being deliberate in that way is really important. But I want to dig a little deeper here, right? And Bo, you started talking about the tough conversation. You didn't really get to the really tough one, right? Which is when I sit down with you, right? I got the deal. I've got it tied up. You know what I'm saying? I know what I'm doing here, and so we need to talk about equity, right? So, you know, I'm gonna get all the money. You're going to put all the money in. Does it work that way?
Really interesting. Just yesterday, the day before yesterday, you're having a conversation with not to be named, but well-known firm here in a project in which we were supposed to be 50-50 partners. And the term sheet came back and it said, hey, we're 50-50 partners. You know, we really want to do this as a 50-50 relationship. You're going to put up 50% of the pre-development money. You're going to be 50% of the ownership entity. But we are going to provide the construction guarantee. And then it keeps going. It's all 50-50, 50-50. Oh, we're going to take 90% of the promote. So that's not a 50-50 deal.
Bo, tell them what the promote is.
So the promote's basically, in the developer sense, it's what after you've gotten a preferred return to your equity provider.
What's a preferred return, Bo? Stop playing, man.
So in the capital sense, you oftentimes have a limited partner and a general partner or a sponsor and an equity provider. And the equity provider usually requires that they get a certain return on their money before the sponsor gets paid. After they've gotten that return, there would be a waterfall or a sharing of the waterfall would be a sharing, some sort of split of the actual money that's made out of the project, with a disproportional amount, a larger amount going to the developer and the sponsor than the amount of money that they put in. So it's how most large-scale developers make money. You know, people really don't understand, I think, the economics of our business that well. But when you see these guys doing these huge projects, that's 90, sometimes 95% owned by a large institution. And the actual developer has very actual small economics, relatively speaking. Most of their economics come from the project outperforming certain hurdles, and so that's the promote is the part of that. But I say that to say that this, legitimately, a large company looked at another, not insignificant company and said, basically, I'm going to take that risk And that risk was fundamentally just backstopping one element of the financing. And for that, they thought they deserved 90% of what ends up being the vast majority of the economics. And so I say that to say that most of us start out with this idea that, hey, I had an idea, or I got a site tied up, or I did this. And if you look at the full life cycle of the development thing, I always think of it as real estate has a food chain. And unfortunately, like, developers are not the top of the food chain. Capital is the top of the food chain. And capital is not just about equity. Capital is about balance sheet. And I think what most people forget is balance sheet, because it goes back to this idea that if I'm a lending institution, or I'm anybody extending you credit, it's commercial world, so I'm not extending you credit based on your credit score, even though that matters a lot in what they're doing. I'm extending you credit based on what do you have backing that up. And so most of us who are getting started out, we don't have a lot to back it up. And so we might want to do our $100 million deal, but we got $100 in our savings account, and that's not going to work, right? And so I think we have to think about that. The last piece that I'd say about this, which maybe relates or not, is that nobody's really a developer. People come to me once and say, I want to be a developer. And I said, nobody's really a developer. Like, this idea that there's people who sit around all day just building these huge buildings. Most companies you see that you think of as development companies do something that pays the bills. The big one, a lot of the older school ones, they own a lot of real estate. They have a portfolio. They have property management. They have asset management. There's nobody, I don't think, except for there's a few merchant builders in this city.
What's a merchant builder?
Merchant builders, someone who builds a building and sells it right away. They're like the equivalent of flippers, but for like really big stuff, right? But they don't actually own any. They don't usually own property. So like some of the companies in the city that are like that, like MRP is predominantly a merchant builder. They build stuff and they sell it. But most of those companies that you think of as developers have another business. Roadside development became roadside development because they had the CVS contract. They built CVSs and triple net leased those things and sold them out. The Menkiti groups grew because we had a brokerage company, right? You look at, William C. Smith's primarily a property management company that's collecting fees off their property management portfolio.
And their second generation, where the father built.
And then the father built for hundreds of years. Right. So like this idea that I'm going to show up because I'm smart and because I'm determined, I'm going to be a developer. You should actually pay more attention to the subtle economics of how the business is around. My big thing for young people is pay attention to subtle economics. Subtle economics. Not what kind of car people drive, not how they dress, not what kind of house they wear. Like, actually do the math, get into their business and understand how the business actually works, because that's where most of the gems are about how you build your company. And what you'll find is that most people who've been successful have some sort of cash flow business that keeps the lights on, or else they would go out of business in that process.
Let me point out a few other gems that people may not know, and one of my board members can speak to this. The principals, the founding name principals of JBG were lawyers first. But they were not only lawyers, they used to buy HUD properties out on Silver Hill Road in Prince George's County. Now, if you know anything about this area, you understand that that's a little bit different than downtown DC or some of these other Class A locations. So understand that everybody starts somewhere, and when you look at them today and you see where they are, you're like, oh, that's amazing, right? But you didn't see the bottom they started from, right? You didn't see the journey that they took. And so that journey means time and dedication. And that's a really important part of this conversation. So as I'm listening to you all, I'm like, wow, I want to talk to you more. Like, how do I get on your account? What makes you want to spend time talking to someone? And when somebody walks into your office or gets a chance with you, what do they need to be able to do so that you're not like, I'll never meet with you again?
You want me to get this one? I'll take it, because I've really struggled with this. Because when I started out in the brokerage business and the development business, I really wanted to learn. I would reach out and I would call people up. And there were some people who were massively successful, who were so generous with their time, who invited me in to see their business. And there were people who weren't even that great, who treated me like crap. And I always said that if I ever get anywhere, I want to be one of those people that you could always get on my calendar. I always have time for you. And then I realized a couple of years ago that didn't work, because I'd be spending all my time just meeting with people and I wasn't going to get anywhere. And luckily, I've had Martin, who's really helped me in being able to engage people and help them get introduced into the ecosystem and the platform. But I think the first thing there's only one message I'd have to people is we think that when we seek out people to either be a mentor or to get something from them, that it's a one-way transaction. That there's something we need to get from them, and we forget that we might have something to bring to them. And so my main piece of advice would be, before you go meet with somebody, figure out how you could help them. Figure out how you could help them. Figure out what is the piece. Ellis has a huge world. Where's the little piece that my company can provide something of value that advances his mission? Because don't forget you have something to offer. I think that's the biggest thing. People go ask for something not knowing that they have something to offer. Last piece here. I went many years ago, I met Joe Horning, Horning Brothers. And I met him because I argued with him about something, and he was like, son, let's go to lunch. But a couple of months later, after I'd gotten to know him, it's like 6 months later, I took him to lunch, and I said, I really want you to be my mentor. He laughed in my face. I was like so hurt. He said, no, I won't be your mentor. But go do something, and I will do it with you. Go do something, and I will do it with you. And that is what really started the trajectory of our company. I went out and did something bigger than I knew I could do by myself because I knew he was going to do it with me. And I think that attitude of go do something and figure out how you can do something that creates value in your partner's world too, as they create value for you, those are going to be really long-lasting relationships.
So I think that is very well said, and I think just a couple of points just to illustrate it. One is I have a tenet of I should not have to work harder than you in your own success. And so I need to make sure that you're working because we're all busy, and I think it's important to me to make sure that you're really hustling and you're following up and you're following through. So when I think about folks that I typically spend time with and have spent time with for over the years, it's really been a focus on two things. One, there are people that I respect in my world that will call me and say, hey, I need you to sit down with this person. And that means that person's already vetted. I already know that person is ready to roll, and we can get down to the get down. It's not a lot of pretense. The other thing is just the fact that when I think about my mentees, they've been absolutely, I remember one called me insistently for 3 months. I still know his cell phone number today. He's been my mentee for 20 years. I still know his phone number by heart because he called me every week at the same time. And I just had to stop and be like, this dude is for real. It's time to go. I'll use that same person as an example. Probably 10 years ago, he called me and he said, I was on vacation with my family. He calls me. He's like, I'm done. I'm stepping away. I really want to start my own development company. And I said, okay, where's the business plan? I need a business plan in a week. That business plan was to me in 4 days. I stopped everything I was doing because I was like, this dude is serious and he's listening. So I only have a short amount of time. We got a family, young kids. And so I want to spend time important to people who are really about this business. And so I do think it's important that when people show up, that to your point, Bo, be the first to give. That's something that a mentor told me about 30 years ago. Make sure you can provide value. The last point I'll mention, because one of the companies that is part of our family is a technology company. And I met, again, a mentee through the pandemic, through a friend, said, hey, can you sit down with this guy? Sit down with him. He worked for a certain organization here in the city. Fast forward to probably over the Christmas holiday, he moved to a fintech company. My organization is trying to actually incorporate fintech fintech into our technology by
Ellis,
figuring
what's fintech?
Financial technology company. It's basically leveraging technology to help advance our work. So we're one of the largest small business lenders in the country, and I want to make sure that we can basically take credit score out of extending credit to our type of people and doing it at scale. So we need technology as a way to do that. Well, talking to one of my mentees, he moved to a fintech company that, unbeknownst to me, I've been looking at. So he said, hey, can I connect you with my senior leadership team? And we're in conversations now. So you never know where the opportunities are going to come. And I've been fortunate to have folks, mentees in my life, who have actually provided me knowledge and insight. And to your point, Bo, it is a two-way street.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. There's a couple of things that jumped out for me that both of you guys have said, but folks always want to sit down to talk about. The first thing is that you don't call a bank for a grant. So you laugh, but it happens all the time, and you know it. But be really clear about what it is that you're trying to do, and again, that business plan is critical. Because for us, where these guys are looking at, probably the next Bo or the next Ellis, or that partnership opportunity, and so are we as a bank, but we are very regulated. And so from that perspective, we are, we have to get to the hard numbers. We're willing to, and I'm willing to sit down and give you some of my knowledge and share, some of my time with you. But the reality of the situation is, if the purpose for your wanting to sit down with me is to get a loan, then there's a level of preparedness, there's a level of background and experience that I'm looking for. And I need to know that don't come to me and your very first project is 100 units something or other, or 1,000 units something or other. Because the reality of the situation is, most likely you don't have the equity, the resources, and definitely not the expertise. You have not stumbled. You have not fallen. You don't know. You've not fully executed on any one transaction, let alone, enough transactions to garner a loan from me to do a 100-unit project or a 1,000-unit project. I mean, it's just not realistic, So for me, it's like, be prepared. Balance sheet is critical. It's everything. Bo said something really interesting a few minutes ago. Is this, what's my collateral? And to be perfectly honest, collateral, yes, is extremely important. But I don't want your building. I don't want to run your building. I'm not in business. I'm in the business of lending money. I'm not a developer. I'm not a GC. I'm not operating a business. My business is lending. And so from that perspective, for me, the balance sheet is almost as important as the expertise. And that's something that folks really overlook. So you can't come with, to Bo's point, $100 on, in your checking account and tell me that you want to do a 1,000-unit project. I mean, it's like, that's a complete disconnect, because when you trip on the banana peel, it's not if, it's when. Because you will trip on some banana peel somewhere down the road in the execution of this project. Do you have the wherewithal, without coming back to me saying I need more money, to recover and to keep going and to complete your project? Because for me, especially if it's a development project, I need to know that you can execute from beginning to end and that you can complete this project. Because I will tell you, I just recently had a situation where this individual had a mentor, but that mentor wasn't willing to guarantee anything. And they said, well, I'm not doing the construction. This person is. So your guarantee is going to come from him. But yet there was 90% ownership of the borrowing entity. So if you know anything about banking, 90% says you guarantee. And if you're not guaranteeing, then you're bringing something else to the table, be it cash. It's got to be something that's going to get me comfortable with that you're in. So a 90% owner that's not willing to guarantee, it's like, okay. So where's my, I don't have any, there's no fallback. Because the other guy that was doing all the work didn't have a balance sheet. And so it's one of these situations where if you're going to trip and fall, you need to be able to recover yourself. After you've gotten your money from the bank wants to know that you have the capability, if there's supply chain issues, if, an unexpected pricing, unexpected delays, because all of that's what's happening now. And so from a banker's perspective, we're looking for someone that is absolutely has the capability to execute and to execute no matter what happens in between. And so when I'm sitting down with somebody, I want to make sure that that individual has more than one project under their belt. Willing to have a conversation with anybody, but not from the standpoint of that you're going to now ask me for $10 million or $20 million in a loan to execute on a project. I've got site control. It's like, but there's so much that's, that goes before that. There's so much that goes after. How much work has been done? How much money have you put into it? You can't tell me that you've put in, $10,000, on a project that you want me to give you, $20 million on. Just not even realistic. So, it's like, have that business plan, you've got to have projects under your belt. It's not enough to just say, my first project is going to be this huge project. Because, it's like, well, why would I sit down with you to talk about something like that when you really don't have the background and experience that is critical, to a banking conversation?
Sure. So let me distill what you just heard, right? So number one, what you heard is don't be selfish. When you walk into a room, it's not just about you, it's also about them. People will tell you that I am a LinkedIn fiend. If you tell me somebody's name, the first thing I do is go to LinkedIn, right? And what's always really important is you need to know more about the person who's sitting in front of you than they need to know about you, right? You need to know things about them that they've forgotten. You need to know where Bo's first deal was, right? You need to know how many people Ellis put on in his previous platforms. You need to know who Sonja's listening, who she's lending to now, and who she's not. All of those things are really very important. And don't forget this. Everybody you see here has had to spend an inordinate amount of time building up their credibility, right? So when Leon calls me, when Rodney calls me, when Jason calls me, and they ask me to call ahead, my expectation is don't embarrass me, right? Because if you burn me, that means for the next 5 or 6 people who come behind you, Ellis is like, yeah, Chris, you sent me such and such. I'm not sure I'm taking this call, right? And that's serious because there's not a lot of people like the people you see sitting in front of us right now, right? It's a small group. We know all of y'all, right? Just like you all know us, right? And we will talk to one another if we have a bad experience, if we think somebody's really talented, right? And the survival and the growth of that ecosystem is contingent upon you paying it forward. Got to keep that in mind. Otherwise, all this stuff we're talking about, it can't work.
And can I just say something too? One of the things that Chris kind of, talked about a little bit there was name dropping. Name dropping is not enough. We have had folks, a couple of folks, that have name dropped me and the bank. City First is in to Chris. And don't you think that that person is going to pick up the phone and call?
Sonja, who is this?
Exactly. And it's like, you're in on this deal? Question mark. Like, Sonja must have bumped her head. What's going on?
That's
here?
right.
Well, the reality of the situation is we all know each other. And
we like each other.
And we like each other. And we respect one another. And if they hear my name, they're thinking, oh, if City First is in, maybe I'm missing something.
That's right.
So let me call to see what they saw or heard or that was shared with them that I don't know about. Now, it's rare that happens, by the way.
It happens. It happens.
Well, no. When I say it's rare that it's happened, that there's something that I know that you don't know.
That's right.
Your gut kicked in and said, I need to call Sonja on this because there's something I must be missing. And it's like, well, no, there's nothing you're missing. That's just not the case. So don't name drop if you have no substance behind what you're saying.
Your integrity is the only thing
Yes.
that you have before you have success. If you have no integrity, you have no access. Your integrity is more important than your balance sheet. It's more important than your experience. It's more important than everything else because when people know what you tell them is what it is, they can trust you and they're willing to bet on you. You must protect your integrity. Let me shift gears a little bit, but I want to get to what you were talking about on the prep call. So you've grown now. You've done your first 5 deals. You've got a little portfolio. It's kind of working well, right? You've got an ongoing business. You were able to quit your day job, and now you really want to grow, right? How do I do that? Because at a certain point, my balance sheet is going to kind of top out. What do I do to get to the next level? What are the resources out there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The broader context behind, a lot of the movement around diversity in commercial real estate is as follows, right? Hasn't been a lot of great research on diversity in commercial real estate, but the best study is in asset management. So we know that of the firms that manage real estate assets, so assets under management from private equity, et cetera,
You're
and
talking
real
about
estate.
money, though. Let's be clear. You're talking about money, not physical assets.
The money, the value of the assets, so the assets under management, the value of the physical assets in the United States in real estate. Companies owned by people of color manage 1% of all the value of the assets under management in the U.S. When you add in all women, that number goes to about 3%. So we are in an industry where that's very undiverse, right? And people are saying, hey, we're going to change that. And what's happening right now is you have amazing organizations like Ellis and others that are putting together amazing programs to help people get into the business. But you do 3 or 4 deals, we're not changing the makeup of the assets under management in the United States. We didn't change that 1% by adding, we seeded the field. That's exactly, we're seeding the field. So what Ellis is doing, he can stand up here and say, we put 200 new developers. He just planted 200 seeds. Some of those seeds are going to get eaten by the birds, and some of the seeds fell on bad land, and some ain't going to get watered or whatever. But maybe 5 of those seeds are going to take off and sprout. And some will grow to be little trees, and some are going to be wanting to grow and to be real big trees. And the question is, once the capital gets outside of that first space, what happens? And that's where we saw people really start to fail in our journey. We happen to have back this idea of nobody's really a developer and balance sheet matters. Mm-hmm. Well, I fell into real estate brokerage, and at a time and at a company that was very successful, and we built a sizable real estate brokerage operation that allowed us to have cash flow, which allowed us to buy property, which allowed us to have balance sheet. And so very early on in our peer groups, us developers would be talking to each other, and there's a group of us who were having some success. People would end up coming to us and saying, hey, I'm about to do this deal that I don't really want to do, or sell part of my company, or I can't get this thing done, or they're telling me my guarantee isn't enough. And so we started experimenting with sort of investing in each other, or providing guarantees, or doing things in the balance sheet. And that kind of got us to a certain level. But at some level, there's no amount of money you can make from a brokerage company or from a property management company or that your friends and family can raise that is going to fill your pipeline. So I wake up one day as a developer, I say, great, we busted our butts for 19 years, and now we got this pipeline. But this pipeline says you're going to build, a $400 million project at Howard University. You're going to build a $700 million project at the Yards. And all of a sudden, you got $2.5 billion of development. You got to put up 40% of that as equity. I can tell you, I don't have those type of friends, right? And so all of a sudden you went from, hey, I can raise a few $1 million to I need hundreds of millions of dollars to execute a pipeline. And that gap is where most folks fall apart.
It's not just us, though. This is across
the spectrum. It's across the spectrum. What I think happens, quite frankly, what happens in a lot of other companies that actually cross that space is there's either some relationship that they develop that ties them to an institutional capital source that takes a chance on them, or they happen to have a friends and family network that's more wealthy, so it can raise more money, or they partner with another company that's ahead of them. Well, here's the problem in our space, right? We are about to release, you'll see it come out next week, our partners at Grow Social Impact did a study with Initiative for a Competitive Inner City on the state of black developers, black and brown developers in the U.S. What the study's going to show is they have 3 sizes. Small, which was under 350,000 below in revenue. Medium, which is like a big session, 350 to 17 million. and then large, which was above 17 million to 50 million, and very large was over 50 million. So here's what the data shows. It's very interesting. Data shows that under 350,000, actually Black and Hispanic owned companies outperform the industry average. We're good at being small, right, from a revenue standpoint. In the mid-size, they're about on par. There's much less of them, but they're about on par in performance-wise, a little ahead on some of the things. And then you get over 17 million in revenue, and there are 6 Black or Hispanic companies in real estate development in America. You get over 50 million, there's one Hispanic company. Now, in those same tranches, there's almost 400, so there's 400 majority-owned companies between 17 million and 50 million. There's another 400 majority-owned companies between over 50 million. So you basically have 800 to 6. That's basically your ratio of sizable development companies. So the question that I think is before all of us, I know I'm talking a lot, but we go back, it stands on people's shoulders. In DC development, we stand on the shoulders of people in the Marion Barry age, Marion Barry who said you got to bring somebody in the room, and then the early people who were basically lobbyists who came in the room and said we're going to be part of this deal. And then it was like, okay. Then it was the big pension fund said we got to put some money through Black folks. We'll give Victor McFarland and Quentin Primo some money. And they actually got to hire people. Those first guys didn't hire anybody. Those guys hire some people, build some talent. Then it was like, oh, we're going to have set-asides. There's 20% got to go to some CBE firms. And then there was a group, Jair was the first, said, I don't want to be a set-aside. What if I was the prime? What if I was the guy who did the whole thing and you can be the set-aside? And then there was a group of us that came right behind him. So I just want to point out that we stand in a history. We don't all just wake up today and be what we are. There's a context to that. And the context we're in right now is that the hard work and the vision of folks like Ellis and others that put down a platform to get people in the game, the next issue is who can scale. And that's a really big issue that's 100% driven by access to capital and ability to execute and build an enterprise beyond just yourself, because that requires employees, it requires a whole bunch of other stuff than just being one talented person.
So I'm going to do this in 2 parts. Ellis, how are you helping people to scale, right? And then Sonja, once they scale, what's the conversation then like with you? Because, Omar, AREP talked about, Sonja out here giving away money, right? So when they are ready, when do you know they're ready? And Ellis, what do you give them to get them ready?
Question. So a couple things. So my organization, and you've heard people refer to it as a platform. We're a family of mission-driven financial institutions, organizations, that's really helping to serve, kind of stand in like this intersection between communities, and that can be broadly defined as our community or the community of the developers or diverse small businesses and the capital markets. And as Bo mentioned, so we've graduated about 200 folks across the country. They've got the knowledge and the training and the expertise. And then the next thing is like, okay, how are you going to put me on? I need some money. And you heard people talk about both experience and balance sheet, and we've been trying to solve for that throughout the time that we've instituted the program in 2017. We developed really early stage capital products for very specific places like Detroit and DC, et cetera, that really helps to focus on the earlier stage, the pre-development and the acquisition financing. We've leveraged our station between, again, communities and the capital markets because people know us, they believe in our vision, and we've partnered with folks like Amazon and Wells Fargo to actually leverage grant dollars, real grant dollars, that actually is going into deals as a proxy for your equity or going onto your balance sheet so that you can begin to build. And so going from you as a 1 to 2 person organization, you have the ability then to hire people and actually to grow your business. As a matter of kind of coming together with emerging about a year ago, one of the things we've also done is brought in real talent who are like business advisors. These are former, very successful entrepreneurs because, again, it is the business. It is a small business. It's a business that you need to run like a real business. It just happens to be a development business. So these are individuals who can help you think about going from a bookkeeper to a controller to when you need to hire a CFO. How do you grow your business successfully So when you go to City First, they'd be like, okay, they know what they're talking about. So we're helping to build across that continuum, because I agree with both 200 flowers bloom and not all of them survive. So it's about making sure that we can help get people to the level and demonstrate that both we should be invested in as a group of diverse developers and entrepreneurs, and the communities in which we are actually investing in are actually worthy of investment as well. So that's the first piece, right? The second piece is to Bo's point around what happens when you get to the next stage. And so this also goes back to the platform. Last year, we created an investment line of business. That investment line of business isn't actually focusing on small businesses, it's actually focusing on businesses that have proven themselves and are ready to scale. So we are investing, and we have invested in growing small businesses that are really ready to scale, that have a certain level of revenue. Last year, we announced a partnership, and this is just on our small business side, with Macy's. Macy's has identified 250 companies that have been very successful, and now they're ready to grow. So Macy's went to a number of large financial institutions, and they all told them, we ain't got nothing for you. Even though these companies have revenue, they're ready to scale, and now they need both equity and debt to grow. And so we're providing that. And so it gets to Bo's last point around like what happens to the developers specifically who are ready to scale. So we're developing the capability in the small business side that we've done, and we're actually beginning to apply that to the development community. And so we are actually in the market now where we're actually raising capital from folks who are within our circle, both in philanthropy and actually in the banking and private sector, to really create a fund that allows us to provide equity, low-cost equity for developers who are ready to grow. And lastly, we'll be announcing later this year a new entity that will really help be the gatekeeper between institutional capital, large institutional capital, who is ready and willing and able to invest equity and debt into this sector. And an example of that is we were approached last year by a large group of life insurance companies who said, we want to help close the racial wealth gap, and we want to do that by leveraging affordable housing and diverse developers to do that. Do you know anybody? And so when you get that call, to Bo's point, you got to be able to put your hands on 4 or 5 people who can execute well, because whoever those folks are that we put out there need to execute, because that door will slowly become open and stay open.
So, Sonja, before you start, we didn't really talk about this, but I think Ellis hit on something that's really important. You don't have to be a developer to be in a development business. And there are a number of lanes that you can play in that let you play in this business but not take the same amount of risk, right? Or to flex into something that everybody's not doing. So some of you guys may know Ben Soto at Paramount Title, right? Ben sees all these big deals that are coming to the city, and he's just clipping coupons. Again, you wouldn't know who he is unless you know who he is. That's a very specialized segment in the business. Appraisers, specialized segment. And those things can go to scale. And if you're developing relationships, right, with folks like those on the panel or others, and even the smaller businesses, you keep moving, right? You don't take the risk, but you provide a service and you're inserted into those deals. And then at some point, when you want to scale up, you flex with those relationships and with that information, right? You want to be that little fish swimming by the mouth of the shark, just picking up the easy pickings. That is certainly a strategy that I've seen a lot of people be exceptionally successful with. So Simon, they get to that point, they've got the chops. Now what? They come back to you.
Well, for us, I mean, we are a CDFI, so that's a community development financial institution. So at least 60% of the capital that we deploy into the communities that we have committed to serve, which in our particular case is DC, Maryland, Virginia, Southern California, as well as Delaware and Pennsylvania. And that Delaware and Pennsylvania market is part of our new market tax credit practice that we have. So we look for impact. We look for location. Definitely the industry segment matters to us because we're only in certain areas. I mean, affordable housing is probably one of the biggest segments that we service. We do a lot with nonprofits, charter schools in particular. So we're looking for particular segments. We're not going to venture into hospitality just because. And you may look great, and you may have, as we've been saying up here, you may have all the chops, but that's not an industry segment that we specialize in. So the one thing I would definitely say is whatever you do, pick the right bank for what you're doing, because all banks are not created equal, and all banks do not, dip their toes into every possible business line that's out there. So that's the one thing I would say is picking the right bank, making sure that, that it's a good fit for you, getting to know that person. It probably is not necessarily starting with me. I got some of my team members in the audience, Autumn Leatham and Sharon Cantrell. They've been doing this for...
Raise your hand, guys. Don't be afraid.
They've been doing this for a long time.
Sorry. Ladies, raise your hands.
See?
Right. Not single. Just...
And so, but you come with the information that is, get to the point quick, because we don't have time for 2 hours to sit back and try and figure out what it is, or to even help you format what the request is. So many times people either change their mind, or they're coming to us with like requests that it's like, okay, so this is a bank, and so what is it that you're really looking for from us? And you can't come to us to say, I have a $69 million project, and I need to borrow, $59 million, or I need to borrow even, $60 million. And it's like, okay, where's your capital stack? And I think that that's something that Ellis referred to a few minutes ago. That equity stack, it's not just your equity injection. And oftentimes, as a CDFI, we will help you with some of that, because we have solved for, this is what Omar was talking about at AREP, we've solved for that we can get you probably 90% loan to value. But remember, we're talking loan to value. We're not talking about equity. Okay? Big difference. Because people talk about loan to value, and it's low loan to value. It's 50%. It's like, we don't want your real estate. We're a bank. We're in the banking business.
We want our money back.
We want our money back. Because how we make money is on the interest that you pay. So you need to be able to repay that loan. And so when we're looking at a package, that's what it's like, what's your primary source of repayment? What's your secondary source of repayment? And that secondary source of repayment we're looking for from the sponsors, from the guarantors. That's where that's coming from. Because the tertiary, source of repayment is the real estate, and that's not what we want, because 9 times out of 10, we're never going to get. It might seem like it's a great deal when you're talking 50% LTV, but when you're trying to, have a fire sale, trust me, you're not anywhere near that. And so that's how we're looking at it. So risk, that's what the bank is looking for. That's what we're looking at first. How are you going to repay us? What's our risk? What's your ability to withstand issues?
Yeah, this first source of repayment, second source of repayment, third source of repayment, something that I think we don't really understand as a development community.
Yeah.
And like one of the best things that I did was spend 8 years at City First on the
Yes.
loan committee, and now another 4 years at Founders. It's been really interesting to see how the bank thinks about that, and I think that's something that people could really understand. I just wanted to say that I don't know if we've made it 100% clear, but somewhere up here there's a continuum of capital.
Yes.
That you're going to start doing deals, depending on what type of deals you're doing. If you're doing single-family homes, you might start by using a retail loan product.
Exactly.
Right? At some point, and you may go through a program, if you've done a few deals, getting you into the development space, of which Capital Impact Partners, Momentous Capital, now has a real expertise in. So you could go through there. Then you get to some place where you really want to be bankable for commercial loans, let's call them in the $500,000 to $10, $20 million size. Mm-hmm. Then you're going to need to figure out how you can look really good on
Yes.
paper and in reality to City First Broadway, Sonja, and to folks like her who are going to help you go through that continuum of capital. As you go through that continuum, You're likely going to be raising money from yourself or your friends and family. And as you get larger in that continuum, you're going to start to have issues saying, well, how do I come up with the $4 million she wants me to have for this project that was $10 million? And maybe I don't have that. I can't just call up my buddies and get $4 million. So this is where I think we're trying to, Melissa Lee, who's here in the front row, create the Obsidian Catalyst Fund, which is a $100 million private equity real estate initiative targeted Black and brown developers that launches in the next quarter to support the equity piece. Now, I'm just giving you the debt. Where do you get the equity as you go into more institutional structured, still too low for any institution. The Goldman Sachs ain't giving you any money when you're trying to do a $10 million deal. At some point, where it gets really interesting, you got to graduate out the other side of that. And now you're trying to come up with just your sponsor equity, not the whole equity. You're trying to go with just your little 10% of the equity. Still, that's where Melissa becomes a huge resource to you. And it's where Ellis is saying, now, hey, we can come back in with another product from insurance companies when that loan, because Sonja's going to have a lending limit. She's going to say, hey, she can help bring other banks to help put that together for you. But at some point, she's going to say, that loan's too big. That's not in our portfolio. See Ellis now working to come in back on the backside and say, okay, now we've got a product for you for that. So I think it's really interesting. I don't know, Chris is more genius than you always think. That he just put together, the whole life cycle of how capital works. And it's all sitting, you could have that in a very small number of people and organizations. But you got to make sure you're going to the right place, the right thing for where you are in your life cycle.
Absolutely.
So I wish we had another hour. I'm going to open it up for Q&A. The one thing that I do want to talk about that Sonja just mentioned, though, is everything here is relational. And you guys need to think about that and understand that you want to have Autumn as your banker. You want to have Brett as your banker. And you want to do deals with them. The guys who have been extremely successful have had the same person with them, probably anywhere between 75% for some to 100% of others. And you know what? When you call that person, they know they have a deal. So they're going to be in credit committee vouching for you because you performed, or it's a mutually beneficial relationship. That matters when you're not the traditional borrower, right? So think very deeply about that. That's critically important. I do want to recognize Miss Lee over here on the end, right? Her theme music is I Get Money. So quietly, she is certainly a resource, very bright and thoughtful person, and would be worth you spending some time with if you're beginning to scale. So at this point, I want for us to stop talking and to field any questions that folks may have. But when you stand up, just tell us your name and your question. Sir, in the hat. We have a microphone.
It's on? Okay.
Greetings, thank you, and peace to everybody. I'm Moses. I had two questions. One is, can you talk, and maybe this question is for Sonja, can you talk a little bit about how draw schedules are set up on projects, and then what would cause a bank to back out once they've already committed to a draw schedule? And then two, the question is, does anybody have any opinion on, and I'm not into this, I'm just curious, on digital currency and how, Bitcoin and such in terms of finance and real estate projects with digital currency? Any thoughts on those two?
All right, so draw schedules, what would cause us to back out? That would mean that we've approved the loan, committed to the loan, and you're now submitting your request for a draw on on that money that's been set aside for you. If you could not produce the receipts, if the percentage of completion is not there, if you're trying to fund something that you say you purchased and we can't verify that, it's any number of things that could go wrong, but, it starts with a site inspection. And then if that site inspection does not bear what you've submitted on the draw, if the two don't make sense, let's say if you're saying I'm, 50% complete on my framing, and my inspection company comes out and they say, well, they're only 5% complete. And so it's those sorts of things that would cause you not to be able to receive the dollar amount that you're requesting for a draw. And at a point in time, it may then make us call into question whether or not these dollars can be put to this project if each time we can't verify? And, we are a traditional bank, so, cryptocurrency and digital currency, that's not our thing. And I don't know of too many banks that are really into that. I mean, that's a separate, and I'm not going to say that it's not viable and it's not something that, will probably be a part of the real estate world at some point in time. It's not today.
Other questions?
I have a question. Hello, everyone. My name is Samuel Leah. I'm coming from Towson University, and I'll be working at Enterprise through the Equitable Path Forward program. My question is, you spoke on your network being important. Is there any associations, clubs, or organizations you would recommend a real estate professional join just to increase their network?
ULI, AREP, and what am I forgetting?
Oh,
There's
DCIA,
DCHFA, there's ZAOBA, there's some other.
Reese.
Reese. All right, so all these are acronyms. We'll make sure that we get you all the definitions of those, but there are probably like 5 to 10 different organizations that you should be a part of. Many of them have young leaders programs, and if you're not a young leader, they've got lots of kind of budding entrepreneurs, but there's lots of information, and that gives you an opportunity to see people over and over again. And so those people you're really trying to get after, maybe, after the 5th panel, you're sitting next to them somewhere, recognize your face, and it's a much easier conversation to have. So that's a great question. The back?
Hey guys, my name is Zach Smith. I just had a question as far as with the loans where you're doing 90% loan to value. Do you all have any additional guarantees that you all need as far as criteria for the projects that you are lending with that type of loan to value?
So the 90% loan to value, the way we get that structured, if you're talking investment real estate, 75% of that is coming from the bank, and then City First Bank has City First Enterprises, which is our nonprofit loan fund. And so we're able to close that gap, and that additional funding up to 90%, not guaranteed 90%, but up to 90%, comes in the form of subordinate debt, behind our senior debt to get you to that, so that the equity injection that's required is substantially less. But we can loan more on the property itself than what you would typically find at a traditional commercial bank. Because we were founded to try and provide access to capital to those that were typically denied. That's the reason that, both City First Bank and City First Broadway, or Broadway Federal, that's the reason that they were formed. And so City First Bank has been around since 1996. Broadway Federal had been around since the 1940s, so over 70 years combined of providing access to capital to minorities that were typically denied is the whole reason. So that's the reason for that particular structure, and that's how we get there. Mm-hmm.
Hold
on, Mike, please.
1 second.
Hold on.
My name is David Ose. I work for Red Brick LMD, and my question is, one of the biggest challenges that developers face today, some of the things that they can't control, like lead times, you mentioned access to capital, low-skilled labor, aggressive schedules. When you pull back the onion a little bit, you realize that it's more market cycle driven. So like you look back in history, it happened in the early 2000s, the 70s, the 90s. How have you guys been successful in like hedging your risk, with these kind of like market cycles? And then how would you kind of like advise young developers? Because I think there's an element of luck, but it's also strategic planning to kind of hedge your risk against these market cycles.
That's a great question. So, if you pay attention macroly to market cycles, the big boys use market cycles that's how they create their value. You buy things and you depress values in a place, and you buy it up, and then you change the way it is. And for those of us who've been in the city, we've seen that over and over again, and that oftentimes corresponds to the major macroeconomic cycles. Challenge is if you're starting out, you don't get to play and you don't get to pick. You don't have a 20-year vision. You don't say this. So I think it's really important to understand what type of structures and what types of products play in what moment of the cycle. And then to think about, I think too many folks want to start off just doing projects, but not owning real estate. When you think about owning real estate, you can actually think about that macroeconomic cycle. Most of the success we had was actually studying the macroeconomic growth trends in cities. I always say we find cities that have strong macroeconomic and demographic fundamentals, and we invest in neighborhoods that are on the other side of perception. You can find throughout the history of any city that there are these psychological dividing lines. You know, here it's the river, other places it's a set of train tracks. Sometimes it's a freeway. In Miami, it's a freeway. They built a freeway to separate the neighborhoods. Historically, we created infrastructure to separate neighborhoods, separate people. What you'll see is that the macroeconomic growth goes up to that, and then it hits against that thing, and then all of a sudden it's like a wall, and then it explodes, and it goes over that barrier, which is a historical prejudice barrier.
Anacostia.
It also is the first to recede from that barrier in economic downturns. If you look at what happens when something goes wrong, it's the fringe of that growth curve that gets hit. So oftentimes, we're playing in those areas and not thinking about the macroeconomics of it, because those are awfully, as a new developer or a small developer, you're getting in that fringe component. So you have to be very careful about what you're exposed to as that market shifts and that market moves. But I think the market downturn, if you're well structured, this is why capital and balance sheet, if you can make it through, this becomes an amazing time to create an opportunity. You know, everything that we were able to do to grow happened in down markets when other people were not focused. Quite frankly, when more established companies may back away, and especially in the smaller spaces, I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, it's very interesting. And the same thing kind of applies to banks as well. Before joining City First Bank, I was actually with M&T Bank, and our CEO, he says, we want to be, you know, during tough times when banks get into trouble and find themselves with portfolios that basically tank them from a liquidity perspective. They, you know, M&T's, you know, strategy was we want to be the last bank on the courthouse steps with cash. So liquidity is king, and no matter what the industry segment that you're in. And the other piece is, you know, there are certain industry segments, depending upon, you know, your geographics and where you're located, that kind of transcend all of that. In the district, it's affordable housing, you know, and that's due to much of the structure and what has been put, you know, the commitment on the part of DC government to, you know, preserve and to grow affordable housing because, you know, let's face it, I mean, it's gotten to a point where, and I grew up here, so, you know, I know what, you know, certain communities used to look like, what they look like today, you know, the physical barriers, you know, to certain neighborhoods, access to those neighborhoods, what that looks like. Well, now, people just, you know, in the interest of affordability, you know, folks are willing to almost go anywhere. And so you have to figure out what industry segment, what particular segment of real estate are you going to focus? If you think about right now, when someone comes to us with office, someone comes to us with retail, someone comes to us with hospitality. Well, these are industry segments that are a little scary to banks right now. And so that's the other piece, is that you really have to be very cognizant that you don't have a portfolio that is heavily weighted in any one area. You do want to be, you know, as diverse as possible within your business line. And then the other piece that Bo has continued to talk about is, you know, developers don't start out being developers. You know, where are you making your money? Where is that other source of revenue that's coming in outside of your development projects that will sustain you through the tough times?
So I'm going to tell a little bit of Bo's business because he's being quite modest. When I worked for Bo, I saw a number of different things that he did, right? So number one, he had the big brokerage. And then the big brokerage, he got a tiny slice, right? Then Bo had his own brokerage team. That slice of pie started to get a little bit bigger, right? So he's got revenue coming from that. Then Bo was also in development, right? But the interesting thing that he was doing is it was fascinating. He was doing the neighborhood-based commercial, which never understood. Started developing a business or a building for him where his offices now are. But he had the uncanny ability to identify entrepreneurs to put in those spaces and then to support them through it, right? So remember we talked about finding your lane, very unique lane, right? But it was a lane that then created value that he could put on his balance sheet. So when you talk about building that entire picture, right? And it was small things. They weren't expensive places. It required a different risk profile, right? But it wasn't much different than buying a single family home in terms of dollars. It was very different in terms of operations. Sonja just talked about something, and it's really the business that we're in here at the agency. Mayor Bowser has said that she's going to have 36,000 units built by 2025, and 12,000 of those are going to be affordable. There is no better time ever in this city to be in affordable housing than today, right? So as we talk about asset classes, we really haven't dug in there. It's a huge opportunity, right? That if you're thinking about entering the residential business, that I would encourage you all to give some thought to. You can work at nonprofits, you can work at for-profits. So Linda will tell you that if you go to a nonprofit, they're gonna throw you in and hope that you can swim. So you get more experience there than anywhere else, right? You've got, I can't call you Corey, you guys small anymore, but mid to large size developers who like to do a lot of action, right? And they will keep you very busy. And so there are lots of opportunities out there right now to play in this segment, so you should really consider it. At this point, out of the respect for all of these busy people's schedules, I want to express an amazing sense of gratitude. What you've been able to share here today has been incredible. To have these people with this amount of time give it so freely is an amazing thing. So we feel blessed to have you here. Thank you all for coming to the first of what we hope will probably this year be 3 to 4 discussions. And we'll look at a number of different things. We talked today about access to capital. We'll be talking about education. We'll be looking at home ownership. And then I won't give you the last one, but it's something special. So thank you, everyone. Happy Black History Month, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.